now got the Fire and Emergency New Zealand, Mitchell Brown. Just so you know, Mr. Brown, my name is Bill Smith. I'm the Chair, Independent Commissioner. We've got Councillor McNally here, who's also a Accredited Commissioner, and we've got Alan Watson on the left there. So we've all read Rebecca's evidence. So it's a matter of you telling us what you'd like, and then we might have some questions, and we might ask the staff if they've got any points of clarification.
Mōrena koutou. Mitchell Brown, Tokaranga, kai whakahaere, mōrena hapari tītai taukarau. So I'm Mitchell Brown. I'm the Community Risk Manager for Fire and Emergency New Zealand for the Northland District. So my responsibilities, I guess, with the District Manager, ensure all of the necessary support and practices for our communities that Fire and Emergency New Zealand has a legislative and hopefully an influencing role to provide our communities with a safe way of existing in terms of how the community can be. Part of that, I guess, is to ensure that we have a part to play with our council colleagues, and we're still, we very much see it as a partnership. And I guess one of the key aspects of the planning hearing for us is how we can offer up opportunities to see where our legislation and council legislation and the likes of the Building Act and building codes and resource management requirements can actually interface with each other. Because in some places there's gaps, in other places there's beautiful connection, and in some places there's a little bit of overlap where there's sort of, I guess, an interpretive grey area which we operate in. Within the feedback document that we've provided, there's a couple of key areas, and obviously to support our councils and our communities, some key areas are around ensuring that the opportunity for our fire and emergency operations with the Code of Practice for Firefighting water supplies can be best achieved. Now, most of the councils throughout the country have a variance on this in terms of whether they've adopted in their district plan and in their engineering appendix the Code of Practice for Firefighting water supplies. So if you have or you haven't, that's the reference point, I guess, of where we see the opportunity for councils and the community to have a basis for supporting the requirements for a Code of Practice to be applied to a property. Now, I guess it's up to the council to determine how best that is done, but I'll give you an example of what we currently operate in the far north, which is if a developer or builder, property owner is looking to undertake a new consented project, what they look to have applied in that process is for Fire and Emergency New Zealand against our templated form to determine what the Code of Practice for Firefighting water supply features for the property could be. I won't say should, because it's a little bit softer than that, because it's not in the district plan and it's not part of the requirement. But the catch-all is for the person to get their building consent through, the Far North District Council asks them to provide the information and see if Fire and Emergency New Zealand see it as appropriate to sign off on against the Code of Practice for Firefighting water supplies to allow that consent to go through. So we're sort of doing consenting process, if you like, by providing advice and support that the council processes require for consent. So in a sort of quasi way, you've got it in there, but we're ensuring that what you are requiring of that consenting process is checked. Now, we have a view that that could be done differently, because obviously if you're signing off on it, then you would understand what you're signing off on.
Yep.
So we would look to see how we can better support that process, because I guess from a FNDC perspective, whilst this is a planning hearing, this is for planners, we deal with the infrastructure people, we deal with the building control people, and we deal with the building compliance people. So firefighting water supplies goes through all four of those parts of the council. And all four of those parts of the council don't necessarily connect the dots to say that's how your bit fits to ours, to ours, to ours. And then the likes of fire and emergency as an agency gets the best opportunity to support it from the planning stage of what doctrine you're using through how infrastructure is provided against the code of practice as an example, and then obviously the compliance and control process. So again, one of the things that I'd suggest to you is that the code of practice for firefighting water supplies is key to our ongoing support for communities and their safety and how they continue to be able to, I guess, meet a reasonable level of firefighting support for their property and for their community.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any questions or thoughts that anyone might like to just check around the firefighting code of practice for firefighting water supplies that is noted in the submission.
So how consistent is that approach that you're wanting now with what happens in Whangarei and other authorities that you deal with?
So the three councils of Northland that we deal with, obviously Kaitāia, Whangarei and South Far North, all three councils currently run, I guess, or have the support of FENS in the same process. So in other words, if you build a property or you're looking to build a property and have it consented, that process of submitting a templated form of the information about what you're intending to do and the water supplies required to match the code of practice comes to us.
Yeah.
We look at it, review it and go, well, that's what the code of practice says. You've said you've met it, sends it back to the applicant, who then puts that with their consent for all the other things they need to do. And that's part of what the council reviews and
it's part of the criteria. Yeah.
So, from my perspective and from FENS's perspective, for the customer, they have to sort of go through this thing twice. And for me, if I was one of those people applying and I thought, oh, I've got to go to FENS, and then they come back to me to say it's all right, and then it goes to the council who then go, we're going to check that you went to FENS to check it's all right, and then we'll sign it off. It seems like a bit of a two-step process, which is expensive, causes delays on the process of administration for someone to actually achieve that. Because I think we can achieve the same outcome by supporting the council to say, well, here's the template that you could adopt, and here's the process that would meet the code of practice for firefighting water supplies requirement for a consent that you already in Kaitāia, Whangarei and Far North have as part of your consenting process. But, you know, it's a little bit outside of this scope of this because we're talking about process now. The principle that, you know, Far North District Council has with the code of practice for firefighting water supplies is fantastic. The one bit that sits to the side of this that may be of interest to the hearing is the Northland District has adopted with the Fire and Emergency New Zealand Act 2017 district fire plans. Now, district fire plans cover all aspects of the risk of fire for Northland, but within that there is obviously quite an emphasis in the area outside of the urban requirements because it talks about how we manage the risk of fire from the rural aspect. So one of the things that crosses over into the code of practice for firefighting water supplies that's in our district fire plan is the ability for water supplies to be known and made available for firefighting in the rural aspect. So for councils to have a connection with that, an awareness of that, perhaps a knowledge of that can be supported by planning in our district plan to say, you know, there are these water sources that exist the council are aware of, would be useful from acknowledging that that is part of our relationship with our responsibility to support communities and the council with firefighting water supplies and operations as required. So again, it's one of those documents that you can reference. Doesn't mean that the district plan signs up to it saying you must have this amount of water supplies in the rural context. But I think from a planning perspective, we have that connection and awareness with that document given it's a legislative requirement for us to have a district fire plan, and it covers right down to the setting of fire seasons and those sorts of things that manage the risk of fire, is again something that connects into what the council planning process are looking for.
Okay, okay. Anything else? You have anything?
Yeah, just two questions, I think. There's, you talk about the fire emergency seeks provisions relating, or the Becker report, to emergency access.
Yes.
And emergency access, minimum carriageway width 4 metres, minimum height clearance, maximum greater than 16%. Can you just talk to me about that a bit? Because I've been on a lot of properties and none of them would comply with that access, including where I live right now. You'd get in, but that'd be as far as you get.
You get in without your ladder and beacons on top.
No, there's plenty of clearance that way, but you'd get in.
Yeah.
But so the width of the vehicle is one, the turning.
Yeah, that's right. So, so that's the other main part of, I guess, of our submission is access, and I guess let's go back to council planning for infrastructure. So obviously your roading networks and what you provide to the community should have reference to our ability for our fire appliances to get to these locations down roadways. And that even goes to traffic management, traffic flows, peak times of day, which could slow our response and attendance. So that's just getting from the fire station to the event through the existing or planned or delivered roading infrastructure. There's parts in all council plans that talk about the crossings. So, you know, what the getting off the road across the verge, the footpath onto the driveway has to meet. And then within, and this is the bit where we have some guidance on what we require, which is exactly what you're referring to in terms of width and height, governed by the width and height of our fire trucks to properties. So if you're going to put up a big flash gate entrance, which would knock off the windscreen on the way through, obviously we'd give some guidance for that. But most of the access for rural properties, and I'd say it sort of sits in this space, is around your vegetation and width of driveways as to gaining access to the property. And of course, this can vary in the rural space in particular, because there's access to the house or there's access to other buildings on the property, which, you know, the community would have an expectation that we would be able to go and assist them with if there was a fire in that location. Now, I guess as a general rule, some of the things we come up against are gradient, exactly what you pointed out, the tightness of the turns. And again, that's beautifully covered for roadways and access of fire appliances to a property. So when you get on the property, and whether you've got the width, the gradient, and the ability to get a fire appliance up there. And this comes in probably even in the urban space where you talk about new subdivisions or right-of-ways being put in, where there's a back section and the distance, A, for access with the width, and then when you get to the end, can you turn around or you're locked in? So I have a weird example from my previous life in the Manawatu, where the Palmerston City Council approved 3.5 metre access, so you get the fire truck down there to this back property. But then both neighbours decided to put a fence up of 2 point something metres high, so you could drive your truck down, but you couldn't open the doors. So, and that's, you know, it ticked the planning boxes, it ticked the requirements of the consent, but that's just where.
That's why you've got a minimum of 4 metres to have a bit of extra.
That's right.
Space to get out the truck, get the equipment, open the doors, and all that.
Get it past the truck, down the driveway.
Okay,
So
the 16 maximum gradient, 16%. Does anybody know what's in the district plan now, or a subdivision or anything like that? Just out of cute.
The operative plan.
Yeah.
I'm not telling you what's in the operative plan.
That's right.
I think it might be 22%.
22%. All right. Well, anyway, you can answer that. Then you don't have to answer it now.
yeah,
So you're looking at a maximum gradient 16%, 4 metre wide, and
there was also some question around what the surface is.
well,
So-
it's difficult because
Oh no,
some subdivisions
exactly.
can be the condition being put on that be sealed or concreted.
Yeah.
Some are just metal, unfortunately.
I
Yeah.
mean, I guess in my sort of common sense way when we've had applications come through and I've had a property owner say, I'm trying to meet this requirement of 16% or width or surface. And I said to them, well, are you building at the moment? They go, yeah. I said, have you had any trucks go up there with building materials, concrete trucks? And they go, well, if that truck can get up there, our fire truck will get up there.
Right.
So unless it dramatically changes after they finish it, there's a bit of a guiding principle that, can sort of say, well, in the building phase, if you've got trucks going up and down, that's a reasonable indication to get a fire truck up there as well.
60% is not very much, 1 in 6.
Yeah.
And the other question I had, you talked about water supply, which is you want it covered by the building code, or it is already, I think, where we are. So in those rural areas, we've got a water tank, which we put a fitting on that you can connect the fire. And in the towns, we have a hydrant system, which in Kerikeri doesn't work because you'll collect all our pipes.
Wow. No, the water falls out of the pipe. I don't know that we're draining it. Yeah. So I think stipulating in the district plan, and again, you did right, there's a crossover. This is where the legislation, the district plan and links to the Building Act and Code of Practice for Firefighting Water Supplies, the building code for what you are advised to do or what you can be consented to do. It starts to get into that grey area, I guess. So, I mean, we seek the council planning process, I guess, to support a better, clearer understanding of how that can reasonably be applied. And I think going through the consenting process where the applicant for their consent has a clear template or matrix that says, I'm doing this, therefore the things I need to demonstrate are this and this for my property, which then council and FENS are already on the same page with. We already say if that's what will meet the requirements of the consent, then we're that job is done.
Yeah, one of the concerns I have, and it might be for the planners, I may have it wrong, but that my understanding is there's tanks to be provided in some of these remote locations for firefighting. So it's got to be full at all times. So you go from a 2 tank that'll look after a family of 4 or 5 to a 3 tank situation, because you can't guarantee they're going to be full.
Yeah. So I think nationally, again, this varies and it depends on the councils and what they've put in. So you've gone from the likes of a 45,000 litre dedicated water supply for firefighting on some properties to a 10,000 litres. And essentially 10,000 litres for a fire appliance will, how long would that supply a fire truck putting out a fire? Well, it's half an hour. So, basically we can, if you've got a fire in a property and you've got half an hour with water supply at 10,000 litres, you're actually probably doing okay to start with, because we'll find other water supplies as well if that's the need. So I think there is some scope and latitude there to think about how, and this is that area we go, well, the code of practice says this, the building control mechanisms don't necessarily require that. And I guess, again, this is the common sense approach that you get to at the end of this process. If you're on your property, and as you would know, how many times have you run out of water? And I'd suggest you never have. And if you've come close, you've gone and got it filled up. Because what's more important on your property is being able to have drinking water and water for sanitation. Yes, the firefighting water supplies will be there because you've got that first bit to meet your immediate need. So most people don't run out of water or have less than a reasonable quantity. Like on my property in Waimate North, I have 2 tanks, one's operating and one's always full. So I've always got 25,000 litres one way or the other. And when this one runs out, I'll cross over, but then hopefully it rains in the next week and they both start to fill up. So that's the practical approach. I think most people living in an environment, a rural setting where they need water supplies on their property, if you give them the guidance, they will follow it because they need it for drinking and feeding animals and all those sorts of things. So that's the practical approach. If we stipulate something, the thing about that is you've got to go check it. You know, when was the last time you ensured you had 45,000 litres at all times in your tanks?
Right now it's good.
Yeah, right now we're fantastic, yeah. But
Yeah, I guess the other thing is,
Yeah.
you know, going back a while, there was a lot of remoter rural properties, farms in particular, putting swimming pools in, and that was put in for firefighting purposes. That was tax
Okay.
deductible.
Yeah, but again, you know, the day that you have your fire will be the day you emptied it to clean it or paint it. You know? So this is, again, great approach. It does kill two birds with one stone, having a swimming pool for leisure and also, you know, firefighting water supplies. But, you know, I think we have to sort of tell our communities this is what is the requirement. But there has to be a little bit of pragmatism to say, you know, we understand that you'll have water for your day-to-day needs and the supply will be adequate most of the time. Well, you know, like I say, that's what we hope to find when we arrive at the property, but there's no guarantees because you're not out there saying, yeah, we've checked you this month, this year that you've maintained your water supplies.
Yeah, rules like this are always a pain in the ass until your house is on fire.
That's it. And then you either have a good day or a bad day, you know.
All right. Any other questions? No?
No,
Any points of clarification from the officers?
Can I just ask a question through the chair, please? You sort of touched on it, but in terms of, because I'm thinking this also in the context of the natural hazards character. So there's rules in there for vulnerable activities that require compliance with the code for firefighting water supply. So I'm just wondering, like, exactly what is required for a new landowner to demonstrate compliance with the.
So look, one of the unique, and it's a great question because it's not touched on in our submission, but it does highlight how the council in previous years have dealt with the natural hazard environment. So you may or may not be aware of the thing that the council looks for in the sending processes of a new build, which is a 20-metre drip line. Okay, you've heard of that?
Yeah.
So do you understand what the purpose of it was when it was put in place for most of us before we were born? So the idea is, if you build in an area where you've got to clear the vegetation or have some distance from vegetation to put your property in, that you mitigate the risk by having a 20-metre separation from your structure to the vegetation, right? So a circle of 20 metres around the edges of your property that you're building. And this sort of goes back to your water tank scenario. So the day that you say, yep, you've built your building, all that's good, and we see you've cleared 20 metres to either the neighbour's property or it's still your property and you've got no vegetation around there, you sign that off. And you've met the fire hazard requirements for that consent. The next day, because no one's going to check this, you go out and plant all of your beautiful garden shrubs and trees within that 20 metres and absolutely reverse the process that you've intended to put in place with the consent. Or if you're within 20 metres of the neighbour's fence line and they happen to have a paddock but then decided they'd put up a shelter belt, got a whole lot of vegetation running down your fence line. I had a very good example of this, which came through the other month. In Kerry, an application for a new deck on the side of a house came in for us to review the 20-metre drip line from that deck as a new consented building component for that property that had already existed. And I'd say the first time the building was built, it probably was okay, but since it's been built, the beautification of the community has happened with lovely trees. And so therefore, this person's go, well, what do? Do I speak to the neighbours about removing their trees? Or they're really worried about getting this consent because in practice, the 20-metre drip line is not audited and maintained after the day you do the consent. So it caused a bit of stress on this poor person. We're going, well, it's for a deck and you've already got an existing house that's part of that. I don't know that the deck's going to be a major fire hazard to the vegetation or vice versa. So, but I mean, if that sort of, is that natural hazard sort of aspect you're thinking about?
The natural hazards chapter has two conditions. It says maintain that 20-metre setback, which is from the Popular District. And you comply with the code from factor for water supply.
Yes.
And we've got submission from Chamber here saying, well, we don't, we both maintain 20% meter setback, by the
Yeah.
code, water supply for firefighting purposes. So I'm just trying to think from a compliance cost perspective,
So what you're saying is they build a house, got the 20 meter thing.
Yeah.
But they don't have to provide any water supply to build a house to put the fire out if the house burns down because it's got 20 meters more.
Well, that's what some submitters are asking for.
So what happens if the fire starts in the house, which is normally where they start? I don't quite get the
Yeah.
logic in that. Is that what they,
So I'm just trying to say, like, if you are to demonstrate that you comply with the code for water supply purposes, does it mean you need to have a separate tank solely for that purpose? Like, what's kind of needed from a practical perspective?
Yeah, so look, I think organisationally, there is a variance on this view because it goes from what it says you should have, 45,000 litres, and a lot of councils have adopted that, and much to the joy of firefighters that arrive there and see this great big water supply, and it's dedicated for them, it's maintained for them. The cost and the economics and the requirement to have that and maintain that is sort of lost in that discussion. So I would go back to our discussion about if you are living on a property that requires water supplies for that property, I would suggest to you in this day and age, most people are putting in more water than they actually need because of global warming and all the changes of
they should have both. Well, they should have both. If you're in that area,
Yes.
the drip line, you should maintain the drip line, and you should have a tank for firefighting purposes. Whether it's 45,000 litres or 10,000 litres, they should have a separate tank for water.
And it's almost like we provide the guidance.
Yeah.
And we say, this is what you should expect to do. And in a lot of cases, I think, like my property, we've done more than required because we don't want to run out of water. Not for firefighting, but we want more water to carry us through. So you actually then tick the box of what it's saying. But in terms of having that crossover into the 20 metre step back and separation, vegetation, I mean, the intent is correct. We would expect our fire hazard awareness for our rural communities to have that understanding and ongoing practice. The issue is, once you've signed it off as being consented,
Right.
who's going out to check it? Or we leave it back on the homeowner, the property owner, to be sensible and responsible. We do promotions and we maintain those messages of building safety around rural properties. But it still comes back to the individual to make those choices about how much water they've got on site. They could have 5 tanks, but all could be empty.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Not accessible easily.
Or
Anything?
not accessible. Yeah.
Anything else?
It's good.
Yeah. Go on. Go on, Ms. Pearson.
Thank you. Through the chair, so I'm the reporting officer for the transport section, so I'm looking at
Yep.
it from the access perspective as opposed to the water supply perspective. If the access rules in the transport chapter did the same job or very close to a job as the firefighting code of practice, is there a preference that the code of practice is specifically referenced, or if the rules themselves did the same job, is that equally acceptable?
Oh, I wish my learned friend Nola was here from Becca to answer this one. It sounds like a university question. I might be missing.
And what you're saying, if your code of practice says 16% gradient, 4 meters width and 4 meters height,
Yeah,
if that goes in the district plan,
yeah.
would you be happy, or would you still want a reference to your standard, your code of practice? Or would you just rather have the code of practice? So I think she's saying is if she puts that in, I'm not saying she will, and we might not agree with her, would you rather have that, or would you rather have reference to the standards? Is that what you're asking?
Thank you, Chair. That's exactly what I'm asking.
Yeah, I guess for consistency, I'd go with the standard. And the reason is, from my experience over 42 years in this organisation and being in a number of communities of the North Island where I've worked, the biggest problem we have with councils and support for what we do is the inconsistency that we've provided. So if you say, the code of practice for firefighter water supplies or access, roading comes from a standard, at least then you're on the same playing field and you
Throughout
can
the
talk to
whole
the same
country.
thing. Yeah.
Okay.
And reality is, standards get reviewed and councils can choose to adopt them in whatever sense, shape and form they wish, but at least we know that's the reference document. And if I say to you, I'll give you a slightly variant version of the far north of accepting these things, it will be varied again in years to come. So I think if we reference the standard as the guiding principles and document, that's probably a better consistent approach from
Okay.
a fence perspective.
Anything else, Ms Pearson?
I have some questions.
Okay, wait a minute.
Oh,
Go on.
sorry,
Anything
I-
else?
sorry, I did just have one more. Was in relation to that 16% gradient. Commissioner McNally's noted that that is it'd be quite a large amount of the finals district that would struggle to meet that gradient. In your experience for a fire appliance, is 16% the absolute maximum that a truck needs to actually get up a driveway, or is that sort of the ideal that we are aiming for? Is it possible for a truck to manage a driveway that's deeper than 16%?
Well, like everything these days, safety first. So is it safe to go up that driveway? That gradient would be what we say. Whether it can achieve it or not varies on the type of fire appliance, how big, how heavy. Some of our fire appliances are four-wheel drive, so that changes the rules again. But I guess the gradient is there for the lowest common denominator, not the one that can meet all needs. And again, it's a bit like, what's the consistency of approach that you want? So that is the line in the sand that we have offered up to this as a submission. Again, if someone's driveway becomes inaccessible because they met the gradient, but they didn't put the right surface on it, then it's raining and it's greasy and the truck can't make it up, then we'll deal with that at the time. But, to stipulate anything more or less, I mean, we've given, I guess, the middle ground as a reference for where we believe access for fire appliances will be able to be met on most occasions. Because there'll always be things outside of that. So, yeah, again, and if that's referenced in the standard, I think that's, the line we're looking for.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
You
look,
with them?
I think just a slight clarification. I think the intention is from Ben's around our engagement with the code of practice is that, for example, we don't go out there and we don't create a situation where council is responsible to go out and check if people have enough water in, and I think I've heard that that's not the case. I also think I heard that, and this is really clarification, that the expectation is that council essentially adopt the implementation assessment of compliance with the code of practice rather than a two-step process through FNDC. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think for the community and for council responsibilities, and again, we support the council in meeting these requirements, but it's just, if the council owns the responsibility, but they want us to check the responsibility, I'm sort of wondering, well, we'll provide advice and support, as we will always do, but it's almost like we're a quasi arm of council signing off on a part of the consenting process.
And my view on that is that that's a totally separate issue, because whether we've put it in the district plan, whether the council and the other arm of the council decides that it's going to do what fire service do now, is a different matter. We're not forcing the council to do that. If we do put it in, I don't think. All we're doing is reference, and I would imagine the existing system will carry on unless the council says, hey, we're going to do that in future. That would be my view, Jim. But I don't know. Is that what you...
Yeah.
We're not, I don't think by us putting it in, if we decide to put it in, would force the council to do what they're doing.
The subject will be broached probably more holistically and appropriately through the subdivision chapter.
Yeah.
That's probably the most logical part to talk about it. It is...
but I know on resource consent hearings, quite often you'll get conditions put on up here as well as Whangarei, where they'll have to provide firefighting, portable water, and then they'll have to provide tank for. And so that happens now. So
I'm broadly familiar. We've worked through a range of both urban and rural the requirements are quite complex, and they are, as I think the submitters identified, a matrix of things, so hard stand areas, all those sorts of things that it's just not one thing on its own. I also note that it's not really common apart from national standards as opposed to codes of practice that or compulsory standards that we would be requiring us to implement third-party documents.
I don't think, just by us referencing the district plan, would we be forcing the council then to take over what they're doing now? I don't think we would be, would we? All we're saying is that if we decide to put it in, is that you've got to go and have a look at that. It's the same like the engineering standards, if they go in, you've got to have a look at them, and then if people go away and look at them, so, well, I've got to go to the FNDC now and get approval. They don't have to go to the council. I don't think but I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, as I say, I think we probably have a more holistic overview of that once we get to the subdivision chapter, I think.
And you can take on board what's been said, and when you do the right to reply, you might.
I think there's a bunch of stuff here that's within the submission, but perhaps not within the ambit of today's hearing, that we might just park. And I would anticipate that we'll see Ben's again when it does come up further down the line.
Possibly, yeah. Okay. All right, yeah. Anything else? Sorry, you wanted one more question, Stephen.
Yeah, well, this man's in the room, Mitchell. You mentioned maintenance of a dedicated supply, and I wrote down by who and who pays, which you talked of a minute ago, and so did Jerome over here, I think. So what I'm concerned about is if does this force a requirement for a regulatory approach or a provision to check that maintenance? And this James would advise me if I'm wrong, but that might actually come into the game of this hearing. The reason I ask is I did a subdivision maybe 20 years ago now, and it was 16 lots, and they wanted exactly what the chair has just described, a potable water and a firefighting for each house. So imagine 16 tanks. So in adjusting the resource consent, there are 2 dedicated water tanks. So there'd be 60,000 litre of water sitting. I doubt they've ever been used. I don't think any has burnt down. But I also doubt that you wouldn't know if they're still well. One's a concrete tank, so it could have leaked and cracked. So the maintenance of that, and I can't recall if I put a provision in there that those 16 houses had to maintain it, which you do as a, for example, no relocatable houses, no containers, blah, blah, all that sort of stuff. And there's a penalty clause if it's breached. So, that triggers a regulatory requirement, perhaps, on the maintenance aspect.
And they're probably
not in any of the ones we've approved.
Probably wouldn't get it's like anything else. If the county doesn't do enforcement, nothing happened.
Yeah, but you're saying one potable, one for firefighting.
That's what the conditions say, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, but who looks after it? And it's what.
An individual property owner, the property owner would look after it. That's their responsibility, and hopefully they would do that because of the house burning down. They haven't got any water. But if you look at what you've apparently done in your subdivision, because it's to serve all of them, I would imagine nobody's looking after a Steve unless there was a condition on. And even then, they might not.
It's on
one condition. One condition.
It's on a jointly owned access way.
Anyway.
So that was one of the questions. But
Can I answer that? Because
a very pragmatic and practical approach from.
It goes back to the point made here about a matrix.
Yeah.
So if you're building a subdivision with 16 properties, you can get relief from the code of practice for firefighting water supplies if you home sprinkle those properties. Because essentially you've shifted the water supply for firefighting into the house.
Yeah.
And because it activates at the early stage of the fire, you don't end up with the risk being I'm going to burn the whole house down, because you've actually either put out or held the fire to that space. So that's something councils can offer up to developers to mitigate the need for putting in big tanks. So there's 2 examples I'll give you. One is from Palmerston City Council, where a developer put in a staged approach. So he put in water supplies for the first 16 houses, and then the roading went into there and the houses were built. And then before he started the next build, he put in the next water supply. So it was cost effective for him to do that as part of his development costs and all the rest of it, and it was staged. So the water supplies existed during the build, and once it was completed, those groups of houses had the right amount of water supply in the vicinity of those properties. So not every property had a water supply in every section, because you didn't need that, but you needed a common ability to provide firefighting water supplies to that group of houses. So that's one way you can look at it. This is this matrix approach.
Okay, all right.
The Horowhenua District Council go to the next level, where at Waitariri Beach, they provide the community with the firefighting water supplies. So they have put tanks in with the right connections for fence, and they have located them across that community in such a way that it meets the requirements.
All the hoses.
Yeah, and then you get to the point which is, now that we've got this infrastructure in play, whether it came from a developer putting it in, or the council owned and put in, who maintains it? And of course, it's pretty easy for a big tank on the main road in out of Waitariri to be maintained if it's got water in it, because there's a big pointer to say it's full or not. So the community tell you whether there's a problem or not. And I guess the tanks that they've got down there are big plastic tanks. So all those issues around earthquake requirement and the rest of it for an emergency are considered as part of the council responsibility.
All right.
So that's, again, the matrix approach is, I think, rather than having you must do,
Yep.
having that ability to reference.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Pearson, or you're all right? Okay, thank you very much for your evidence. So is that the agenda now?
Yes,
And
morning.
if you wish to join us for morning tea, you, by all means you can do. We just can't talk about what you've just said. All right?
That's all right.
You can talk about anything else.
House rules, right.
You can talk about fire trucks and fire engines.
Or what your next building under property.
I will
Right,
stop
thanks for the opportunity.
the recording now.
Thank you.
Thank you.